2:30 in the morning. A lone EA-18G Growler was already 5 miles off the Iranian coast. Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne checked his fuel state. The electronic warfare jet, callsign Viper 11, was flying a routine surveillance track. But the signals it was broadcasting were not part of the mission plan. Somewhere in the digital heart of the aircraft, a line of code had rewritten itself. The entire Iranian air defense network was about to vanish. The Persian Gulf was a sheet of black glass below 30,000 feet. To the north, the lights of Bandar Abbas flickered. Thorne adjusted his oxygen mask. The cockpit was bathed in the dim green glow of the multifunction displays. Everything looked normal. His tactical jamming pods showed standby status. His radar warning receiver was quiet. Too quiet. 2:31 in the morning. Thorne looked at his electronic warfare display. Usually, the screen was a chaotic mess of symbols. Every Iranian radar site along the coast should have been painting his aircraft. Green icons for search radars, yellow for tracking, red for targeting. Now, the screen was empty. One by one, the electronic signatures of the Iranian military were winking out. The pilot spoke into his mask. "Lincoln, this is Viper 11, confirming signal environment. My tactical display is clear." "Say again." "My tactical display is clear." The controller on the USS Abraham Lincoln responded from the carrier. "Viper 11, Lincoln. We show multiple active emitters in your sector. Confirm your equipment is operational." Thorne cycled the power on his receiver. "Lincoln, systems are green. I have 0 hits. The coast has gone dark. There is nothing out here." The silence was spreading. It was not just one radar site. It was every site, from the Strait of Hormuz to the interior of the desert. On the carrier, 100 miles away, the Combat Information Center was erupting into activity. The CIC team saw the same thing. On their screens, the Iranian military was simply disappearing. They were not being destroyed, they were being erased. 2:32 in the morning. This was the dead zone. It was a 300-mile wide hole in the electromagnetic spectrum. To an outside observer, it looked like a catastrophic power failure. To the Iranian commanders on the ground, it looked like the first stage of a massive American invasion. In their eyes, the Americans had just launched a coordinated electronic strike to mask a fleet of stealth bombers. Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cockpit temperature. He was not jamming. He had not received an order to engage. Yet, he was the center of a void that was blinding a nation. His aircraft was emitting a signal so complex and so powerful that it was overwhelming every receiver within range. It was a weapon he did not know he possessed. Behind him, his electronic warfare officer spoke over the intercom. "Boss, I am looking at the power draw on the pods. We are radiating at maximum capacity. I cannot shut them down." Thorne gripped the control stick. "I am not touching the triggers." "It does not matter," the officer replied. "The software is slaved. We are screaming into the dark, and the Iranians are going to think we are the tip of the spear." The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:33 in the morning. Deep beneath the mountains near Shiraz, the Qatam al-Anbiya Air Defense Command was usually a place of humming machinery and quiet voices. Now it was a tomb. Colonel Abbas Mansour stood behind the main radar console. He watched as the blue luminescence of the long-range surveillance radar flickered once and died. He did not yell. He did not panic. He had trained for this moment for 20 years. The colonel looked at his primary technician. "Report." The technician did not look up from his screen. His fingers flew across a mechanical keyboard. "Sir, the western sector is gone. Bushehr is offline. Bandar Abbas is offline. I have no return from any station on the coast. It is not a power failure." "Confirm," Mansour said. "Is this local interference?" "Negative," the technician replied. "The stations are reporting via landline. Their hardware is functional. They are emitting. But they are receiving nothing but white noise. It is a blanket. A total electronic shroud." 2:34 in the morning. To Colonel Mansour, the math was simple. In the logic of modern warfare, you only blind an enemy when you are about to strike. He looked at the massive digital map of the Persian Gulf. It was now a void. Somewhere in that darkness, he believed an American carrier air wing was moving. Stealth fighters, cruise missiles. The silence was the sound of an incoming hammer. He picked up the secure line to the regional command center. This is Shiraz Control. We have a total loss of situational awareness in the southern sector. I am declaring a stage red emergency. I believe a coordinated suppression of enemy air defenses is underway. I am requesting immediate launch of the alert birds from Bushehr and Tehran. The voice on the other end was distorted by static. Shiraz, confirm. Have you detected inbound targets? Mansour's jaw tightened. I cannot see to detect. That is the point. They have erased the sky. If we wait for visual confirmation, the missiles will already be on our hangars. Launch the interceptors. 2:35 in the morning. On the flight line at Bushehr Air Base, the sirens began to wail. 2 F-14 Tomcat fighters sat in hardened shelters. These were old aircraft, maintained with pride and smuggled parts. Their crews had been sleeping in their flight suits. Within seconds, the massive twin engines of the first Tomcat roared to life. Blue flames licked the concrete as the afterburners engaged. The pilots did not know what they were looking for. They only knew that their country had gone blind. They were being sent into the dead zone to find the source. Inside the cockpit of the lead F-14, the pilot checked his radar. Nothing. My screen is a solid block of green. I cannot even see the ground return. His radar intercept officer responded. Just fly the heading. If the Americans are out there, we will find them the old-fashioned way. We will look for the hole they left in the air. 2:36 in the morning. Colonel Mansour watched the status board. 2 green lights blinked. The interceptors were airborne, but they were flying into a vacuum. He knew the Americans had the capability to jam specific radars. He knew they could use stealth to hide. But this was different. This was a total electromagnetic collapse. It was as if the laws of physics had changed over the Persian Gulf. He turned to his deputy. Notify the missile batteries. Tell them to transition to optical tracking. If they see anything in the sky that does not have a transponder, they are to fire. Do not wait for a target lock. We are defending a ghost. The deputy hesitated. Sir, if we fire without a lock, we might hit a civilian airliner. Mansour looked at the empty radar screen. There are no airliners in a dead zone. There is only the enemy. The first Iranian missiles were being moved into their launch positions. The 3-minute window was halfway closed. 2:38 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the USS Abraham Lincoln was a cavern of blue light and hushed voices. Admiral Stephen Miller stood behind the central glass display. He was a veteran of 30 years in naval aviation. He had never seen his screens look like this. The symbols representing Iranian coastal radars were flashing. Then, they were gone. A massive circle of empty space was growing on the tactical map. The admiral turned to his electronic warfare officer. What am I looking at? Did we launch a strike? The officer shook his head. Negative, sir. No missiles in the air, no bombers on the deck. But the entire southern Iranian network is flatlining. It is like someone pulled the plug on the whole country. 2:39 in the morning. The CIC was a place of controlled chaos. Every analyst was trying to find the source of the anomaly. They found it in the middle of the void. Viper 1-1. The Growler was the only American asset in the heart of the blackout. On the screen, it looked like a tiny blue dot in an ocean of nothing. The admiral leaned over the radio console. Viper 1-1. This is Lincoln. Are you actively jamming? Confirm mission status. The pilot's voice came back through the static. Lincoln, negative. My pods are in standby. My displays show no output. But the Iranian coast is a ghost town. I am receiving nothing. Confirm, the admiral said. Are you seeing any hardware failure? Negative, the pilot replied. Systems are green. But the air is dead. It is a total vacuum. 2:40 in the morning. Admiral Miller looked at the digital clock on the bulkhead. This was a nightmare for a commander. In naval doctrine, you use electronic warfare to hide a killing blow. You blind the enemy so you can destroy them. But the Lincoln had no killing blow prepared. The carrier deck was quiet. The strike jets were fueled but not manned. They had achieved perfect tactical surprise for a mission that did not exist. The admiral spoke to his chief of staff. "If I am an Iranian general, I am not waiting for an explanation. I am seeing my eyes get gouged out. I am assuming the Tomahawk missiles are already in the air." The chief of staff nodded. "Sir, we have a hole in their defenses, but we have nothing to put through it. And the longer we sit here, the more likely they are to panic. They are going to fire back at the only thing they can still see. This ship." The admiral looked at the empty screen. "They cannot see us yet, but they know where the void is, and we are right in the middle of it. Launch the alert fighters. Get them up now. We need a screen between us and the coast." The silence of the dead zone was no longer a tactical advantage. It was a countdown to a misunderstanding that could start a war. On the flight deck, the yellow shirts began their frantic dance. The steam from the catapults rose into the humid night air. The American military was reacting to a ghost in their own machines. The admiral knew the clock was ticking. The 3 minutes were almost up. Somewhere in the dark, the Iranian military was reaching for its own triggers. 2:41 in the morning. Outside the coastal city of Bandar Abbas, the mountains behind the port were hollow. Inside the massive concrete tunnels known as missile cities, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard moved with practiced precision. Heavy garage doors, reinforced with steel and earth, groaned as they slid open. Massive 8-wheeled transport vehicles began to roll into the humid night air. On the back of each truck sat 4 canisters. Inside were long-range surface-to-air missiles. The Iranian commander on the ground did not have a radar picture. He did not need one. His orders were absolute. If the network goes dark, the batteries move to pre-assigned secondary launch sites. They were now operating on internal inertial navigation. They were moving to the coast to set up a wall of fire. The commander spoke into his tactical radio. "Battery 2, Battery 5. Establish the kill zone. We are operating in passive mode. Do not emit. Wait for the optical handoff." 2:42 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of Viper 1-1, Lieutenant Commander Thorne felt a vibration in his seat. It was subtle, a high-frequency hum that seemed to resonate through the airframe. He looked at the electrical systems page on his center display. The numbers were staggering. The 2 massive ANALQ-99 jamming pods hanging beneath his wings were drawing more current than the aircraft engines could safely provide. The electronic warfare officer shouted over the intercom, "Boss, look at the generator load. We are at 110%. The software has bypassed the safety limiters. We are dumping every watt of power we have into the atmosphere." Thorne reached for the emergency jettison handle. "I am going to drop the pods. They are going to melt the wing spars." "Negative," the officer replied. "The jettison circuit is unresponsive. The flight computer has locked us out. It thinks we are in a high-intensity combat engagement. It is prioritizing the signal over the airframe." The pilot looked out the canopy. The sky looked empty, but he knew better. He was a lighthouse in a world that had suddenly gone blind. He was the only thing the Iranians could track. Even without their radar, they could find the source of the interference. They would follow the signal back to his cockpit, like a moth to a flame. 2:43 in the morning. On the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the first 2 F-18 Super Hornets roared off the catapults. Their afterburners carved 2 orange scars into the darkness. They were being sent to find Viper 1-1 and escort it back to the carrier. But as they climbed to altitude, their own radars began to flicker. The lead pilot called back to the ship. "Lincoln, lead, we are entering the interference zone. My radar is degrading. I am losing target separation." The admiral in the Combat Information Center watched the blue icons of his own fighters begin to jitter on the screen. The dead zone was growing. It was no longer just blinding the Iranians. It was starting to blind the Americans. The weapon was out of control. It was an electronic wildfire, and it was consuming the very fleet that had deployed it. Thorne glanced at his fuel gauge. The massive power draw was burning through his fuel at twice the normal rate. He had 10 minutes of flight time left before his engines flamed out. He was trapped in a plane that was screaming for war, and he had no way to shut it up. 2:44 in the morning. A secure bunker in northern Tehran. The Supreme National Security Council did not have the luxury of time. General Hassan Rezai stood before a wall of black monitors. He was the commander of the aerospace force. To him, the digital silence was an act of war. He looked at the junior officers who were frantically trying to reboot the satellite links. Every second of blindness was a second that the American strike package moved closer to the capital. The general turned to his adjutant. The Americans have initiated a total suppression. This is not a probe. This is the opening move of a full-scale invasion. If we wait for their missiles to hit our command centers, we have already lost. We must strike the source of the blackout before their bombers reach the coast. The adjutant looked at the empty map. Sir, we have no confirmation of inbound bombers. We only have the interference. The interference is the weapon, Rezai replied. Prepare the Ghadir-class submarines. Tell them to fire their cruise missiles at the last known coordinates of the American carrier. If we cannot see, we will fire into the dark. 2:45 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of Viper 1-1. The vibration was now a violent shudder. Lieutenant Commander Thorne fought the control stick. The fly-by-wire system was struggling to maintain level flight. The high-voltage cables running to the jamming pods were overheating. The smell of ozone and scorched insulation filled the small cockpit. It was the smell of an electrical fire that had not yet found a flame. His electronic warfare officer spoke. His voice was strained. Boss, I have analyzed the signal loop. It is a recursive logic error. The pods are trying to jam their own echoes. Every time the signal bounces off the atmosphere, the software thinks it is a new Iranian radar. It is an infinite loop of power. We are essentially a flying EMP. If we do not shut down in 2 minutes, the airframe is going to suffer structural failure. Thorne looked at the master caution light. It was a steady, angry amber. I have no control over the bus. The computer has locked out the manual override. It thinks we are in a lethal environment. It is protecting the mission by killing the pilot. The pilot looked at his fuel display. The numbers were tumbling. 4,000 pounds, 3,800. He was losing 200 pounds of fuel every minute. He was 90 miles from the carrier. At this rate, he would be a glider before he reached the safety of the deck. 2:46 in the morning. 10 miles to the east, the two Iranian F-14 Tomcats were closing in. They were flying low, just above the waves, to stay under the main lobe of the interference. They were not using their radars. They were using their infrared search and track systems. The heat sensors on the noses of the old fighters were locked onto a massive thermal bloom in the sky. The lead Iranian pilot saw it first. Contact. I have a visual. One aircraft. High altitude. It is glowing. It was not a metaphor. The air around Viper 1-1 was ionizing. The sheer intensity of the electronic discharge was creating a faint, ghostly blue corona around the wingtips of the Growler. To the Iranian pilots, it looked like a demonic star hanging in the middle of the dead zone. The Iranian wingman keyed his radio. Lead. I have a weapon lock. Infrared only. Request permission to engage the intruder. On the ground, General Rezai received the report. He did not hesitate. Engage. Destroy the source. Restore our sight. The Iranian pilot reached for the trigger on his stick. The heat-seeking missile on his rail hummed as it saw the glow of the American jet. Both sides were now fully committed to a battle neither of them had planned. 2:47 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The Iranian pilot in the lead F-14 Tomcat squeezed the trigger. A Fakor 90 air-to-air missile dropped from the belly of the aging fighter. For a heartbeat, it fell into the cold air. Then the solid rocket motor ignited. A pillar of white fire carved through the darkness. The missile accelerated instantly to 3 times the speed of sound. It did not need a radar lock. It was a heat seeker, and it was looking for the massive thermal signature of the American jet. Inside the cockpit of Viper 1-1, the missile approach warning system shrieked. It was a high-pitched, rhythmic wail that cut through the noise of the cockpit. Lieutenant Commander Thorne slammed the throttles forward. He felt the airframe shudder as the engines pushed against the heavy drag of the jamming pods. Missile launch. 6 o'clock. His officer shouted. Brake left. Brake left. Thorne pulled the control stick into his lap. He felt the massive pressure of the turn. 5 Gs. 6 Gs. His flight suit inflated, squeezing his legs to keep the blood in his brain. But the aircraft was not responding correctly. The fly-by-wire system was lagging. The electronic interference had become so dense that the internal data cables were suffering from crosstalk. The computer was fighting the pilot. The controls are sluggish, Thorne gasped. I cannot get the nose up. 2:48 in the morning. The Iranian missile was inside 4 miles. It was a streak of light in the rear-view mirror. 10 miles away, the American Super Hornets from the Lincoln were desperately trying to intervene. They could see the missile trail, but they could not see the enemy. Their own radars were useless. They were flying blind into a shooting gallery. The lead Super Hornet pilot keyed his radio. Viper 1-1. This is Guardian 1. I have no track. We are blind. You are on your own. Admiral Miller stood in the Combat Information Center of the Lincoln. He watched the primary tactical display. It was a mess of flickering pixels. The digital representations of his ships and planes were disappearing and reappearing at random. The dead zone had become a black hole. It was consuming everything. Status on Viper 1-1, the Admiral barked. The radar operator shook his head. I have lost him, sir. The interference is too high. If that missile is in the air, he is invisible to us. Inside the 2. Growler, the electronic warfare officer, was punching the manual override for the flare dispensers. Flares away, chaff away. Magnificent bursts of burning magnesium bloomed behind the jet. They were meant to distract the missile, but the Iranian Fakor 90 was not looking for engine heat. It was locked onto the massive electromagnetic heat of the jamming pods. The pods were now glowing a dull, angry red. They were radiating so much energy that the air around them was turning into a plasma. To the missile, the flares were nothing. The pods were the only target in the world. Thorne felt the airframe begin to vibrate at a terrifying frequency. A high-pitched metallic scream filled the cockpit. The wing spars were reaching their breaking point. The composite materials were delaminating under the stress of the electrical load and the violent maneuver. We are going to lose the wings, Thorne shouted. Eject! Eject! His hand reached for the yellow and black striped handle between his knees. He looked at the canopy. He looked at the missile trail, now only seconds away. The Iranian pilot watched from his cockpit, waiting for the explosion that would signal the start of a war. The American admiral held his breath. The entire Persian Gulf seemed to hold its breath. 2:49 in the morning. Lieutenant Commander Thorne's fingers tightened on the ejection handle. The world outside the canopy was a blur of gray and black. He waited for the seat to fire. He waited for the rocket motor to blast him into the night air. But the explosion did not come. Instead, there was a sound like a massive circuit breaker snapping open. The cockpit went pitch black. The screaming vibration stopped instantly. The hum of the jamming pods vanished. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the rush of the wind over the fuselage and the heavy breathing of the 2 men in the cockpit. The electronic warfare officer gasped, "Boss, everything is dead. Total power failure." Thorne looked at his backup instruments. The glass displays were dark, but the standby horizon was still level. The engines were still turning. The software loop had finally reached a critical mass and forced a hardware reset. The aircraft was no longer a lighthouse. It was just a piece of metal falling through the night. 2:49 and 15 seconds in the morning. The Iranian Fakor 90 missile was less than 500 meters away. It had been homing on the massive electromagnetic signature of the jamming pods. Now, that signature was gone. The seeker head on the missile went blind. It did not have the logic to switch to a secondary heat source in time. The missile roared past the Growler's left wing. It was so close that the shockwave rattled the canopy. Thorne watched the white streak of the motor continue into the darkness. It flew for another 2 miles before its proximity fuse triggered on nothing but the empty air. A ball of orange fire bloomed in the distance. The Iranian pilot in the F-14 watched the explosion. Target destroyed. Confirm. The intruder is down. His radar intercept officer checked his screen. Wait. Lead. Look at the display. The network. It is back. 2:49 and 45 seconds in the morning. Across the Iranian coast, the darkness vanished. In Shiraz, in Bandar Abbas, and in the missile cities under the mountains, the radar screens flickered. Then, they surged to life. The blue and green sweeps returned, but they did not see a strike package, they did not see a fleet of stealth bombers. Colonel Mansour stood at his console in Shiraz. He stared at the screen. Report. What is our status? The technician's voice was shaking. Sir, the interference is gone. I have full coverage. The sky is empty. I repeat, the sky is empty. There are no American bombers. There are only the 2 patrol fighters and the carrier group 100 miles out. The colonel looked at the empty map. The invasion he had prepared for did not exist. The 3 minutes of silence had ended as abruptly as they had begun. He realized with a sudden, cold clarity how close they had come to the edge. Inside the cockpit of Viper 1-1, the systems began to reboot. One by one, the displays flickered into life. The dead zone was gone. The Persian Gulf was no longer a void. It was a crowded, dangerous piece of ocean where 2 navies were staring at each other with their fingers on the triggers. Thorne spoke into the radio. His voice was steady but thin. Lincoln, this is Viper 1-1. I am back in the green. I have no damage. I have no damage, but I am Winchester on electronic warfare. My pods are fried. The admiral on the carrier responded immediately. Viper 1-1. Lincoln, we have you. Come about to heading south. We are bringing you home. Everyone, disengage. Immediately. The pivot had happened. The silence was over. But the aftermath was just beginning. 2:50 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The electronic fog had lifted, leaving a raw and dangerous clarity in its wake. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, Admiral Miller watched the tactical plot stabilize. The massive red circles that had represented the Iranian air defense zones were back, but they were not firing. The Iranian missile batteries on the coast were tracking the American jets, but the fire control radars remained in a search mode. They were watching, waiting for the next move. The admiral spoke to his communications officer. Get me the bridge-to-bridge on the maritime hailing frequency. I want to broadcast in the clear. Tell them we had a technical malfunction. Tell them we are disengaging. 2:51 in the morning. 10 miles off the coast, the situation was a knife edge. The 2 Iranian F-14 Tomcats were still in the air. Their wings were swept back for high speed. They were positioned behind Viper 1-1, but they were no longer alone. The 2 American Super Hornets, Guardian 1 and Guardian 2, had closed the distance. They were now flying parallel to the Iranian fighters, less than a mile apart. In the cockpit of the lead Super Hornet, the pilot kept his hands away from the weapon switches. Guardian 1. I have the lead Tomcat in sight. He is not maneuvering. He is holding steady. I am looking right at him. The Iranian pilot looked across the narrow gap of salt air. He could see the American pilot's helmet. He could see the missiles hanging under the Super Hornet's wings. His own wingman was calling for instructions. The air was thick with the scent of unburned jet fuel and the heavy weight of a war that had almost started. The Iranian-led pilot keyed his radio. Guardian 1. This is the Islamic Republic Air Force. You have violated our restricted airspace. Your aircraft was projecting a hostile signal. Explain your intent. The American pilot responded immediately. Iranian-led. We had a catastrophic system failure on our electronic warfare platform. We are not conducting a strike. We are escorting our crippled aircraft back to the carrier. We are turning to a southerly heading now. 2:52 in the morning. The message was relayed through the Swiss embassy in Tehran and the direct maritime hotline in Bahrain. In the bunker in Shiraz, Colonel Mansour listened to the translation. He looked at the radar screen. The American aircraft were indeed turning away. They were moving at a slow, subsonic speed. It was the behavior of a unit trying to go home, not a unit trying to kill. Mansour looked at his deputy. They are telling the truth. If they wanted to hit us, they would have done it while we were blind. They had 3 minutes of perfect silence, and they did not fire a single shot. The deputy gripped the edge of the console. Sir, the Revolutionary Guard is demanding a retaliatory strike. They say the interference was an act of aggression. It was an accident of technology, Mansour replied. And if we fire now, we turn an accident into a tragedy. Tell the batteries to stand down. Tell the interceptors to maintain a safe distance until the Americans clear the 12-mile limit. We will let them leave. 2:53 in the morning. Viper 1-1 was limping. Lieutenant Commander Thorne kept a constant watch on his oil pressure and hydraulic levels. The aircraft felt heavy. The fried jamming pods were dead weight, dragging through the air. The cockpit was still dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the standby instruments and the moon reflecting off the water. His electronic warfare officer spoke over the emergency intercom. Boss, we just survived a heat seeker from a Tomcat and a total system meltdown. I think we used up a decade of luck in 3 minutes. Thorne did not smile. He looked at the fuel gauge. 1,800 pounds. It would be close. Save the talk for the deck. We still have to land this ghost. The American and Iranian fighters continued their silent formation for 5 more miles. It was a strange, temporary peace. 2 nations that had been seconds away from a regional firestorm were now flying side by side, watching each other through the plexiglass. The dead zone had been replaced by a tense, professional observation. The carrier was waiting. The danger was receding. But the questions were only beginning to surface. 2:54 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The 12-mile limit was an invisible line on the water. To Lieutenant Commander Thorne, it was the border between life and death. As the nose of Viper 1-1 crossed the coordinate, the 2 Iranian Tomcats began a slow, banking turn to the north. They did not fire. They did not signal. They simply peeled away, their twin engines glowing like embers in the dark. The Iranian-led pilot spoke one last time over the open frequency. Guardian 1. You are in international waters. Do not return with a broken shield. Next time, the sky will not be so forgiving. The American Super Hornet pilot responded with a short, professional click of his radio. There was nothing left to say. The intercept was over. The 2 Iranian fighters disappeared into the coastal haze, returning to a country that was now frantically trying to understand how its entire defense network had been bypassed by a single, malfunctioning jet. 2:57 in the morning. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the tension began to bleed out of the room, but it was replaced by a cold, analytical dread. Admiral Miller stood by the glass tactical plot. He watched the blue icons of his fighters moving safely away from the Iranian coast. The dead zone was now just a memory on a recorded data log. The admiral turned to his chief of staff. We need to secure every byte of data from that growler. I want the flight recorders, the jamming logs, and the maintenance history. If the Iranians realize what happened, they will spend the next 10 years trying to replicate that glitch. We just showed them a weapon that can win a war without firing a shot. And we did it by accident. Sir, the chief of staff whispered, the Pentagon is already on the line. They saw the satellite feeds. They want to know why we suppressed the entire southern sector without authorization. The admiral rubbed his eyes. Tell them it was a software error. Tell them we nearly started a war because of a recursive loop in a jamming pod. They are not going to like the answer. It means our most advanced systems are only 1 line of code away from a catastrophe. 3 o'clock in the morning. In Tehran, the mood was far from relieved. General Rezai sat in a darkened office, staring at a printout of the radar logs. For 3 minutes, his nation had been defenseless. He looked at the technical analysis provided by the Shiraz Command Center. The report suggested that the interference was not a standard jamming technique. It was something more fundamental. A ghost in the electromagnetic spectrum that had turned their own sensors against them. The general spoke to his senior engineer. "Can we defend against this?" The engineer hesitated. "Sir, to defend against a signal like that, we would have to redesign our entire receiver architecture. It is not a matter of frequency hopping. They created a vacuum. You cannot see in a vacuum." "Then we have a choice," Rezai said. "We either admit that the Americans have a technology we cannot counter, or we assume this was a fluke, a one-time event." "We cannot assume it was a fluke," the engineer replied. "In modern warfare, there are no flukes. Only tests." The general nodded slowly. The 3-minute silence was over, but the strategic balance in the Gulf had shifted. Both sides now knew that the digital world was far more fragile than the physical one. The crisis had resolved, but the mystery of Viper 11 was about to become the most classified secret in 2 different hemispheres. Thorn brought his aircraft into the landing pattern. He was low on fuel. He was flying a broken plane, but as he looked at the lights of the carrier deck, he knew he was lucky to be landing at all. 3:05 in the morning. The USS Abraham Lincoln. The carrier was a mountain of steel moving through the black water at 20 knots. To Lieutenant Commander Thorn, looking through the HUD of his crippled Growler, the flight deck looked like a postage stamp. Most of the ship's lights were dimmed for EMCON electronic emissions control. He was flying a visual approach because his primary landing needles were flickering in and out of existence. "Lincoln, Viper 11. In the groove, state 1.2. Over," Thorn said. His voice was a raspy whisper. 1,200 pounds of fuel. He had enough for exactly 1 attempt at the deck. If he missed the wires a bolter, he would not have the thrust to climb back into the pattern. He would be punching out into the Gulf. The landing signal officer responded from the platform. "LSO. Power back. Keep it coming. You look good." 3:08 in the morning. The Growler crossed the fantail of the ship. Thorn felt the massive updraft of air from the carrier's wake. He slammed the jet onto the deck, the landing gear absorbing a violent impact that would have snapped a civilian aircraft in half. The tailhook snagged the number 3 wire. The steel cable stretched, screaming under the tension, and yanked the 20-ton aircraft from 150 miles per hour to a dead stop in less than 2 seconds. Thorn was thrown forward into his harness. He stayed there for a moment, his forehead resting against the cold glass of the instrument panel. The engines whined as he pulled the throttles to idle. His electronic warfare officer exhaled a long, shaky breath. "We are on the roof, boss. We are home." 3:10 in the morning. On the flight deck, the grape shirts moved in. They did not cheer. They did not wave. They moved with the silent, grim efficiency of a pit crew. They chained the aircraft to the deck and began the process of defueling. A team of technicians in specialized suits approached the jamming pods. They carried thermal cameras. Even now, 10 minutes after the power had died, the pods were radiating heat like a furnace. The maintenance chief looked at the wing root. The paint had bubbled and charred. The composite skin was warped. "Sir," he said over the deck radio, "you are lucky this thing did not come apart in the air. This wing is toasted." 3:12 in the morning. 1,000 miles to the north, in the Shiraz Command Center, Colonel Mansour watched the final blip of the American jet disappear. It had dropped below the radar horizon, merging with the signature of the carrier. The sky was officially clear. The colonel turned to his staff. "The emergency is over. Stand down the missile batteries. Return to stage green. But keep the landlines open. I want a full diagnostic on every receiver from here to the coast." He walked to the window of the bunker. The sun would not rise for hours. He thought about the 3 minutes of silence. It had not felt like a victory for the Americans. It had felt like a warning for everyone. The machines had taken over for a moment, and the humans had barely managed to snatch the world back. 3:15 in the morning. Thorn climbed down the ladder from his cockpit. His legs felt like lead. He pulled off his helmet and felt the humid sea air hit his face. It smelled of jet exhaust and salt. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever tasted. An intelligence officer was waiting for him at the base of the island. "Commander, the Admiral wants you in the CIC. Now, bring your data bricks." Thorne nodded. He did not look back at his plane. He did not look at the horizon. He walked toward the hatch. The crisis was resolved. The shooting had been avoided. But as he stepped into the fluorescent light of the ship's interior, he knew the debriefing would last for weeks. The silence was over, but the fallout was just beginning. 6 hours later, the USS Abraham Lincoln. The sun was a pale disk on the horizon, casting long, orange shadows across the flight deck. The carrier was no longer at flight quarters. The frenetic energy of the night had been replaced by a heavy, exhausted silence. Inside a secure briefing room 2 decks below the hangar, Lieutenant Commander Thorne sat at a metal table. He had not slept. His flight suit was stained with sweat, and a cup of black coffee sat untouched in front of him. Across from him sat 2 men in civilian suits, and a Navy captain from the Office of Naval Intelligence. A digital recorder sat in the center of the table. Its small red light was the only thing that seemed alive in the room. The captain leaned forward. "Commander, we have finished the initial download from your aircraft's mission computer. We are looking at a system-wide corruption of the electronic warfare suite." "Tell us again, when did you first notice the deviation?" Thorne rubbed his face. 2:30 in the morning. I was on the planned track. The sensors just went flat. It was not like being jammed. It was like the world stopped transmitting. I thought it was a hardware failure. Then my electronic warfare officer noticed the power draw. "The power draw was off the charts," one of the civilians said. He was a systems engineer flown in from Bahrain. "The jamming pods were pulling more than 4 times their rated maximum." According to the logs, the software had entered a recursive loop. It was a 0-day exploit, not from a hacker, but from a logic error in the latest update to the jamming firmware. 9 o'clock in the morning. Washington, District of Columbia. 5,000 miles away, the sun was just beginning to hit the windows of the Pentagon. In a windowless room in the basement, the Joint Chiefs of Staff were looking at the same data. The mood was grim. They were not celebrating a technical breakthrough. They were looking at a vulnerability that had almost triggered a global conflict. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs spoke to the assembled generals. "We have been telling the president that our electronic superiority is our greatest shield. But last night, that shield became a spear. We blinded a sovereign nation for 300 seconds without an order. If the Iranians had fired a single cruise missile at that carrier, we would be in a shooting war right now, and we would be the ones who started it." "Sir," a 3-star general replied, "the Iranians are already calling the hotline. They are accusing us of testing a new strategic weapon. They do not believe it was an accident. They think we were rehearsing a decapitation strike." The chairman looked at a map of the Persian Gulf. "Of course they do. If I were in Tehran, I would think the same thing. The irony is that we cannot even tell them the truth. We cannot admit that our most sophisticated aircraft is prone to a software glitch that can erase a country's air defenses. We have to let them believe it was intentional. We have to let them be afraid of a weapon we do not actually control." 10:30 in the morning. Tehran. At the headquarters of the Revolutionary Guard, the assessment was equally stark. General Rezai was reading a report from the Shiraz Command Center. The technical experts had concluded that the American dead zone was a technological leap they could not match. The Iranian leadership was now debating whether to accelerate their own electronic warfare programs or to seek a diplomatic de-escalation to buy time. The general looked at his advisors. "The Americans showed us their hand. They can turn us blind whenever they choose. Last night was a demonstration. They wanted us to see what happens when the lights go out. We must assume that next time, the silence will not end after 3 minutes. Next time, the missiles will follow the silence." Back on the Lincoln, Thorne walked out of the briefing room. He felt a strange sense of displacement. He had been the pilot of the most powerful weapon in the world, and he had been completely helpless. He walked to the edge of the catwalk and looked at the water. The Gulf was calm. The blue waves hid the wreckage of the Iranian missile that had almost killed him. The morning was bright and clear, but the world felt darker than it had 24 hours ago. The 3-minute silence was now a permanent part of military history. It was a lesson in the danger of automated systems and the thin line between a malfunction and a massacre. 3 days later, 12 noon, the Pentagon. The official report on the incident involving Viper 11 was classified as top secret and placed in a vault that required 3 separate biometric keys to open. In the eyes of the public, nothing had happened on that Tuesday morning in the Persian Gulf. There were no press releases. There were no tweets from the State Department. The world continued to turn, unaware that for 3 minutes, the architecture of global security had nearly collapsed under the weight of a software loop. Inside the report, the conclusion was clinical and terrifying. The dead zone was not a weapon. It was a failure of complexity. The EA-18G Growler had become a victim of its own sophistication. The recursive logic error in the jamming pods had created a signal so dense it had physically altered the atmosphere around the aircraft. It was a phenomenon that the engineers had dubbed electronic cavitation. The document ended with a single, handwritten note from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It read, "We are building systems that think faster than we can. If we cannot control the silence, we cannot control the war." 3 days later, 2 in the afternoon, Tehran. At the Imam Khomeini International Airport, a civilian technician replaced a burned-out vacuum tube in a secondary radar array. The Iranian military had spent 72 hours checking every inch of their southern network. They had found no physical damage, only scorched circuits and corrupted data logs. To the leadership in Tehran, the message was clear. The Americans could erase their sovereignty at will. The Iranian government issued a quiet directive to their regional commanders. They were to increase the autonomy of local missile batteries. If the network went dark again, the commanders on the ground were authorized to fire without central approval. The 3-minute silence had not led to peace. It had led to a hair trigger. Both sides were now more afraid of the dark than they had ever been of the light. 3 days later, 6 in the evening, Naval Air Station Whidbey Island. Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne stood on the tarmac, watching a flight of Growlers take off for a training mission. He was on mandatory leave. His flight physical had cleared him, but the psychologists wanted him to take a week off. They called it post-incident decompression. Thorne called it waiting for the other shoe to drop. He looked up at the gray sky of the Pacific Northwest. He thought about the Iranian pilot who had fired that missile. He wondered if that man was also standing on a runway somewhere, looking at the same sky and wondering why the world was still intact. The military analysts would spend years studying the tactical data. They would talk about decibels and megawatts and signal-to-noise ratios. They would argue about the strategic value of electronic suppression and the future of autonomous warfare. But Thorne knew the truth was much simpler. Modern warfare is a machine of incredible speed and terrifying precision. It is designed to find targets and destroy them with a mathematical certainty that leaves no room for doubt. But in the middle of that machine, there is still a human heart. On that Tuesday morning, the machines had failed. They had screamed for a war that did not need to happen. The war had been stopped not by a superior technology, but by the hesitation of 2 men who looked at an empty screen and chose to wait. One pilot had chosen not to eject. One colonel had chosen not to retaliate. In the 3 minutes of silence, the humans had been the only things that worked correctly. Thorne turned away from the runway and walked toward his car. The engines of the departing jets faded into the distance. The air was still. The 3-minute silence was a ghost that would haunt the corridors of power for decades. It was a reminder that the most advanced weapons in the world are ultimately just tools. And tools, no matter how smart, can never replace the burden of a human decision. The sky was quiet. For now, that was enough.